So in the last series, we talked about how a single seller of a particular good that costs nothing to make maximizes revenues. Remember, we used the example of finding a truckload of these magical pills. We also could have called this maximizing profit, since in this case, the amount of revenue that was taken in would be exactly equal to the amount of profit that was kept. As you've almost certainly learned by now in other classes, profit is equal to your revenues minus your expenses. And this is still true even in economics. If expenses are equal to 0, then profit must be equal to just revenue. However, it's very rare in the real world that expenses are literally equal to 0. Typically, you have to pay some people to work for you. So now we have to think about the questions, what should we produce? But also, how much of it should we produce while keeping costs in mind? Let's start really simple, and then we'll add some complexity on top of it later. So let's start by assuming that we have a perfectly elastic demand curve. Now, what perfectly elastic means is that the demand curve for this product is actually just horizontal. For simplicity, let's pretend that the price here is equal to $2.50. And so what does a horizontal demand curve actually mean? Well, what it means is that you can sell as many of these products as you want at the price $2.50. They won't pay $2.51 for this pill, but they'll pay $2.50, and there are an infinite number of buyers willing to pay that. However, there is no truckload of pills for us to find. Instead, we're going to have to pay someone to produce these pills for us. So first of all, to make these pills, we're going to have to hire a pharmacist to actually put them together. The problem is that the pharmacists are all busy making different pills for someone else's company. So how do we convince them to switch to make our pills? Well, the easiest way to do this would be to pay them what they're currently being paid, plus a little bit of extra, in order to make the switch worth their while. In other words, we have to pay the pharmacist at least the value of their opportunity cost. Remember, opportunity cost is the value of what you give up in order to do what you're currently doing. If you want someone to switch from what they're currently doing to something else, you're going to have to cover their opportunity cost, as economists like to say. Now, as a tip, you can apply this to your own life. If you want to get a raise from your boss, the best way to do so is to get an offer from a competitor for a higher paying job. Not to just tell your boss some sob story about how you could really use the extra money. In effect, you have to demonstrate that your opportunity cost is actually high. So now, we're ready to understand the idea that companies are currently making the right things. So I'm going to make a bold claim here. Companies are making the right thing. If they weren't, then there would be money to be made by switching to making something else. Now, if you assume that companies exist to make money, which seems like a pretty good assumption in the real world, then not switching to something that could actually make them more money would be kind of weird. Somewhat paradoxically, the greedier you think a company is, the more likely it is that they're going to be making the right thing. Now, what do I mean by right? Right in this context means the things that people actually want and are willing to pay for. There are obviously plenty of things that we all want, but for a lot of these things, we're not actually willing to pay for them. For example, I would love to have an apartment at the top of one of the tall apartment buildings in downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan, that I could use just as like an office. However, I'm not willing to actually pay for that because doing so would entail giving up too many other things in my life that I value more. Now, let's think more about this opportunity cost type logic. And what I'm going to propose is that all costs are opportunity costs. And more importantly, all of these costs are costs to someone. Different people are going to vary in the opportunities that they forego and how they value them. So it's important to always keep in mind who has foregone which opportunities when we calculate the cost of convincing someone to take some action. So how do we think about costs in the context of healthcare? A crude way to do so would be to think about the cost of an illness in terms of the number of years of life lost. If your life expectancy is low for any reason, contracting a fatal disease is not as costly, measured in the number of years of life lost, as if your life expectancy were high. For example, suppose that we have two people who contract a deadly disease and there's only one cure available. Person A is 95 years old, and person B is 16 years old. Without treatment, these people will unfortunately pass away within a year. With treatment, however, they will live to be 100. Okay, so their expected life okay? Now, based on this information, who should get the one cure? Patient A or patient B? First, we should acknowledge that this is a terrible choice to have to make, but that doesn't change the fact that a choice must still be made. And unfortunately, this choice and many like it are ones that doctors and hospitals face every single day. Based on this information here, most of us would probably agree that the 16-year-old should be the one that gets the treatment instead of the 95-year-old. Right? The 95-year-old is only losing out on 4 years of life if you think about the one more year of life they will get with the disease and then passing away at an expected age of 100. The 16-year-old still has 83 more years left of life ahead of them if we think about the 1 year with the fatal disease than the 100-year life expectancy. Now, this was an admittedly morbid example, but we can do a less morbid one as well. It's no secret that STIs spread around in retirement homes faster than they do in the general population. Why is that? Well, the cost of contracting one when you're older is much lower than the cost of contracting one when you're younger. And so older people tend to be a little bit less careful than young people, at least at the margin.